All right, so this is our final panel for the day, but certainly not the least. When we start out thinking about what we want to cover during each of our patient forums, the MRA staff, our minds instantly go to all of the incredible science candy, whether that's an experimental therapy or a just approved therapy. But this panel, this is where the rubber meets the road, because this is where we get to honor what you all have learned throughout your journeys with melanoma. And when we were discussing during our prep call, there were real themes that emerged that I think we were all really excited to talk about. And that's what we're gonna do here this afternoon. So we're gonna address the topics of sharing and disclosing your diagnosis, of advocating for yourself, something that we've already heard quite a bit about, and the challenges of survivorship and adapting to a new normal. I'd like to kick things off by asking this incredible panel to introduce themselves, because I know I wouldn't do any of them justice. So why don't we start with you, Trena?
Hi, I'm Trena Brown. I had my big toe amputated, and that was followed in a couple of years with metastatic melanoma to my lungs. And that was the point I got introduced to MRA.
Awesome. My name is Camille Price. I had stage 3B melanoma that I was diagnosed with in 2021. And I had surgical resection. I went through cryopreservation, a sentinel lymph node biopsy, and targeted therapy in adjuvant setting that I finished in late 2023.
Okay, so I'm Elizabeth McGowan. I live here in Washington, D.C., gratefully near MRA. My cancer emerged way before MRA was a twinkle in anybody's eye, but so it's easier for me to list the body parts where I haven't had melanoma, but it started with my skin, it went to my lymph, and then it reappeared in my lungs and my liver and my spleen. And so after 11 years, I was done, but I was diagnosed just a few years out of college, which was in the 80s, and this finished up in the mid 90s. And I'm still here, so that gives you some perspective.
I'm James Skelton. I live in Buffalo, New York with my wife and daughter. I was diagnosed with melanoma in 2000, about 4 years ago in 2020. And had initially was stage 3C. In 2022, it recurred in my lymph nodes and intestines, and I had surgical resection, back on immunotherapy, and I'm almost done with my second round of immunotherapy, hopefully within the next couple months. But got involved with MRA because I wanted to start a golf tournament to raise money and awareness for melanoma research, and was looking for melanoma charities to donate to, and I found MRA through that. So really thankful to have the opportunity to come to this event.
And we're so thrilled that all of you are here with us today on this stage. Like I mentioned earlier, when we had our prep call, there were just so many topics that I knew just listening in that would really connect and resonate with our participants here. But we decided as a group that we'd start with, how do you tell someone else? How do you tell your friends, your family, your colleagues, your neighbor down the block what your diagnosis is or what you're going through at various moments in time? And every one of the people on the stage have dealt with this differently, and that's great because you're gonna get a lot of different perspectives. I'd actually like to start with Camille for this one. So how did melanoma impact your work and other social activities?
Yeah, certainly. So when I was diagnosed, I was 2 years out of college. I was 24 at the time. To save you the math, I'm now 27. But I had just started my first job. I'm very passionate about what I was doing. I was a consultant. My work was very intense, but it was very exciting for me, and I really wanted to keep on working through my diagnosis. It was an incredible distraction in part. I wanted to further my career, and I also wanted to believe that, there was a future beyond that. You don't kind of want to give in and believe maybe that that you should just kick it and pause and see what happens. And so part of the journey for me was being able to be really honest with the managers that I had at work and saying, I want to continue contributing, but I'm going to need your understanding of these kinds of allowances, and setting up a structure to say, I have PET scans with this frequency. I may need to go to the doctor at this frequency. I'm going to take 2 weeks off here and there to pursue surgery, that kind of thing. So on the work front, I would say there was a little hurdle to clear for me on being really honest with my supervisors, and I actually found that through being more honest with them, they were more on my team and they could support me more effectively. They would reach out to me. It was a very humanizing kind of feeling, especially in a world of COVID when we were all on Zoom, and it can be very hard to connect in an interpersonal setting. With my friends, it was also relatively difficult to raise that, partially because they didn't always know how to react, and I had a secondary sense of embarrassment almost sharing with them because I knew that they didn't know how to react to that news. But I realized very early on it was important for me to share honestly what was happening to me so that they could design settings for me to interact with them in ways that were comfortable for me. So in a COVID world, that meant usually outside. I was being treated at Memorial Sloan Kettering, and of course, with lots of other vulnerable patients around. If you come in with COVID, it's really problematic, and you're not getting surgery if you have COVID and you want to test before you're going into the hospital. And so having social settings that were COVID risk-free was really important. We talked a little bit about this on the prep call as well, but being 24 and having melanoma, you're also going on dates and doing all the kinds of things that you do when you're a young person in New York City. I already felt relatively robbed of my young 20s due to COVID, so I didn't really want to continue pressing pause. And I vividly remember talking to my mom, who has been my total superwoman through all of this, and saying, Mom, do you think that people are going to be deterred, or people are not going to be interested in me because I'm going through this crazy life experience? She's like, Camille, that's an amazing screening mechanism. Because if they're not interested in you because of that, then you don't want them anyway. So it was all for me about, finding the silver linings and sharing with people. And I've spoken a fair bit with Renee about this when she was writing an article a couple of years ago about my experience, to say, actually, every time that I told someone, once I decided that I was comfortable doing so and I wasn't sort of reliving the trauma of my diagnosis every time I was sharing, some of that burden that I was experiencing of going through it alone was kind of lifted. And I've found my close friendships have really deepened as a result of that vulnerability.
Yeah, thank you. Now, Camille, you were treated in the adjuvant setting, so that meant there was a definite beginning and a definite end of your therapy, right? Well, I'm sure we'll get there. But I'm curious, did your friends treat you differently afterwards, after you discontinued that treatment?
So I think within my friend group, I play sort of the role of confidant, I would say. People tend to come to me for advice and support, and I really pride myself on playing that role among the people that I care about. And given the scope of the problems that I was dealing with at that time, I think my role within the friend group sort of shifted because people didn't want to bring their trivial matters to me. But in reality, their trivial matters, which I never really saw as trivial at all, were great distractions. And so I continued to encourage friends of mine and family members to treat me just as they would have previously, because I still really care about, your job, whatever you're doing at work, your latest and greatest dating life, whatever it is, I want to hear about it. Don't be afraid to call me about things that seem minor just because I'm going through something major. Now I would say things are relatively back to normal, and actually the 2 years that I went through adjuvant therapy were hard in some ways because you were struggling with this relatively invisible disease and illness that kind of comes on, comes off. I was the queen of side effects. Like, if you want to talk about paniculitis, you know where to find me. I had all sorts of weird things going on. And so when you're in this sort of invisibly ill setting, that's a bit challenging because people just don't outwardly know that you're suffering. So continuing to be honest with them was very important for me during that time. And Cody, I think in part what you're referencing also that we talked about on my call with you was that people didn't really know how to react. And I think now that things are done, I've had a lot of peripheral friends come out of the woodwork to send me these essays of text messages or leave me these long voicemails saying, I'm so sorry that I was not there for you more during the 2+ years that you were struggling with this, but I just did not know how to emotionally support you during this time. And so in the wake of all that, I think it's been important for me to be very forgiving and never make anyone feel that they weren't doing enough, because I think we've heard from other folks on this stage today, it's just hard for the supporters as much as it is for the patients.
Yeah. Thank you, Camille. And Trena, I know you were in a different stage of life when you learned about your diagnosis. So as a recent retiree, how did that upend?
Yes, at the other end of the age spectrum. Yeah, well, first of all, let me say that my melanoma journey started in the 80s with a misdiagnosis on my toe by a dermatologist who told me, don't worry about those streaks on your toe will probably get darker and it'll probably turn black as you age. So I didn't worry about it. Skip to 2013, my toes amputated. I had just retired and I had made a list of places that I wanted to visit, like a bucket list after you retire. Well, that was, well, actually it wasn't thrown out the window. I think one of the first questions I asked my oncologist was, am I gonna be able to go to China in September? and I did make it to China. So, thinking that was done, I was totally thrown that 2 years later, the cancer had metastasized to my lungs. So for me, since I had worked, 50 years to get where I was going, I was really looking forward to this travel and also visiting people that I hadn't seen in many, many years. So it was a stark, like a brick wall interruption to my life. What do I do now? Excuse me, and I decided that what I would do would be just what I was doing, but I couldn't travel. So I continued going to the gym and seeing friends and just continuing with my life with this thing in the back of my head that, maybe I was going to be here, maybe I wasn't, because of course I had consulted Dr. Google before I consulted the doctor, so, as did my friends. So.
And when you told your friends and family, how did they react?
It was very awkward because, Black people don't get melanoma, so that's what we thought. And it was a shock, and people just, friends, family, neighbors, no one really knew what to say to me. And a lot of people said, I guess inappropriate things, but, there was nothing that could, there was nothing for them to say because they just had no experience with, what I was doing. I did find that I had a whole new family at Johns Hopkins that understood, exactly what I was going through. So that was a lot of support. I do live alone. I did have neighbors to come to me 6 months later and said, "Oh, I thought you died." So, yeah. I was like, "No, I'm still here." So, people just, they don't know what to say, and things come out of their mouths that is surprising, but you just got to roll with it.
I don't have a great transition for that one. So James, you mentioned in your introduction that you have an 8-year-old daughter. And we've heard time and time again today that someone might be diagnosed with melanoma, but melanoma certainly impacts the entire family. Could you share a little bit about what you've told or how much, if at all, you've talked to your daughter about this?
Yeah, it was, very early on, something my wife and I talked about, like, okay, how do we share this with our daughter, who at the time was 5 years old when I was diagnosed. I think what we kind of came to is that, kids are pretty observant and they're pretty clever, and you can't really hide things from them. And everybody knows their children differently. So I wouldn't pretend to say that this is the end all be all of what to do, but we tried to really be as honest as we could. Making sure that we kind of had a little, sometimes we might wait a little bit until we had some information about what the next step was or what the next thing was, so that, we're kind of clear in what we're telling her, that it wasn't just completely uncertainty. But I think it was good for her. I think she's learned a lot. I think she's pretty mature for a 9-year-old. And I think that, really, her feeling like she's kind of sharing in the experience with us has been good. I mean, it's certainly helped me because, she supports me more than anything, to be honest with you. It's kind of the reason why, you kind of push through certain things, is for your family, so for my wife and my daughter. But, really, they understand more than you think they're going to. And they really can kind of be, a great supporter. But also, I do think that it's helped her to, understand what's going on when I've been, physically having issues with side effects and other things like that, or, when I go in the hospital for surgery. I mean, she knows something's going on, so knowing what it is has given her a better comfort level. The funny story is that, so her during the summer, she goes to the summer camp program, and I'd pick her up and drop her off from camp, and I'm 40 years old. Her teacher was like, "Who's that guy that drops you off? Is that your grandpa?" and she's like, "Oh no, that's my dad. Like, his beard turned white because he had cancer treatment." And I think her teacher was like, "Oh boy," like, but it's funny because she just she knows what's going on. She understands it, and honestly, she's really kind of the reason why I've been able to push through a lot of it. So.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're a really proud dad, and sounds like a pretty great kid. Could you describe a little bit about how melanoma has changed, or not, the overall family dynamics?
I don't know that it's changed the family dynamics. I think, more so just that, I think it's brought us together in a lot of ways, but, the reality is that it's not always easy. I mean, when you're going through treatment and having side effects, like a lot of what I've had is like, joint issues and soreness and things like that from the immunotherapy, as a side effect of the immunotherapy. There's days where it's hard for me to drag myself out of bed, and doesn't always put me in the best mood, and I'm sure sometimes I end up taking that out on my family. I mean, it's just, unfortunately, you try not to, but it is something that happens. So I think it's definitely something that you kind of just have to realize that you kind of have to push through stuff like that, but you also have to realize that it's not always going to be easy. It's not always sunshine and rainbows. You're going to have people that are your greatest supporters, but there's going to be challenges, and you kind of just have to, realize that it's okay. You can get through those things together. At the end of the day, though, having such great supporters is has made things much easier for me. So.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And Elizabeth, when we were talking, you described melanoma as a rock that just hung around your family's neck. Could you speak a little bit more to that?
Yes. I mean, I kind of grew up with melanoma, and I'm looking over there at Leah, I think her name is. My father died of melanoma when I was 15, and I had 3 sisters, 1 older and 2 younger, and he had been diagnosed in his early 20s, so I wasn't shocked when I discovered my own. But it casts a pall on your family. I mean, fortunately, we had senses of humor and we could cope, but it is like another member of your family, this melanoma. And to have him die, and then to me be diagnosed, and I was, at my first newspaper job out of college, and I could not tell my family. I said, I cannot burden them with this. It is too much. I can speak the words, but I thought, I'll just muscle through. And it was a skin lesion. It was back here. It came off. We all know where our scars are, right? Then when I felt a bump, I don't know, a year or two later, and I went to the doctor, and I played on a rugby team, and I was praying to the Lord that it was a rugby injury, but it wasn't. It was more melanoma. Then I knew I had to tell my family.
Yeah.
So I did, and it was hard, and I still feel like I was taking this giant stone and saying, here, hold this.
Yeah. So Elizabeth, throughout that period, where were you getting support?
Well, I had good friends, so that was incredibly helpful. I formed a cancer support group of people because I found, you run into people in the hall. So we could talk. So that was very soothing to have people, and maybe it's easier, or maybe it was easier for me. I mean, I'm a reporter. I talk to strangers all the time. To share your story with strangers than it is to talk, with my sisters. Like I said about that stone. So that's how I coped.
That's great. That's great. And I think that's something that we hear at MRA all the time too, that sometimes it's easier to talk to someone through a computer screen who doesn't know every detail of your life than it is to talk to your best friend or to be vulnerable with your friends and family. And that's okay. Like I think as long as you're getting that support, it doesn't always matter where you're getting it from. But one thing that we also know is that you still need to advocate for yourself, and that self-advocacy is so important. So switching gears a little bit here, and I'd like to start with James. James, from the very beginning, when we were talking about this panel, you were really adamant that you weren't just a melanoma diagnosis, that you were a father, a husband, a dad, that's repetitive, a Bills fan, a Disney fanatic. So how did you help your doctors see that you were more than just a diagnosis?
Yeah, I think it's not always easy, because going into that setting can be a little bit intimidating. Like you're really like, you want to talk about, the treatment and the options and what's going to happen and what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing. But I also think that just bringing up things about your personal life. Hey, we're going to Disney, so I need to adjust my treatment schedule a little bit to accommodate that, or just talking about your family and what you're into. Honestly, like I really early on, my wife and I both really connected with the nurse practitioner that we saw on a regular basis, and it's just really helpful because you kind of look forward to seeing that person. And we actually talked a lot about Marvel and Star Wars TV shows and stuff like that, and it just kind of it's comforting because you kind of know that they care about you. But I also feel like it helps them to just see you, in a more kind of human light versus just just the medical piece. But a lot of times I think honestly, and honestly, we were really fortunate that all the people at Roswell, which is the cancer center in Buffalo, are just super friendly and super, inviting and really just, helpful for patients. But I do think that, to some degree, if you open up with your care team, it really does help to get them to open up with you, and it helps develop that relationship and makes it less makes you feel less anxious going in for your next appointment.
Yeah. And goodness gracious, where am I? I also wanted to ask Trena that you had mentioned that at the beginning, at least, of your journey, that you didn't always want to know all the details of what was in a treatment or how it was all going to fit together. Why was that?
I enjoyed my bubble. And I had to think about that today as I was sitting in lunch, and we were discussing things around the table, and someone brought up a new blood test. I don't know if I wanted to try this new blood test or not. You know, I'm just kind of happy, you know, was happy, and I guess I'm still happy, you know, living in the bubble I created. It's a coping mechanism, and it was, you know, easier for me. Of course, you know, I would learn things and delve into them a little bit more, but I think that compared to most of the speakers who, you know, have been here today, I have definitely been less interested in knowing all the details, all, you know, the real details.
Yeah, and I think that that's really important because advocacy doesn't always look the same person to person, and we also need to do what we need to do to protect ourselves and that self-care piece. I do want to challenge you a little bit on this because I've also heard you say that at the time that you knew there were pretty close to 50-50 odds and that you wanted to be in the group that was going to make it.
Yeah,
So,
actually, my doctor told me 60% of the people that were going through the Opdivo-Yervoy combination didn't get to the end because it was too harsh. But he said 40% did. So prior to that, Dr. Google had told me I was going to die in 6 months. So it's like, I decided I was going to be in the 40%. Why not? There were, you know, a lot of people in the 40%. So I was determined just to get to the end and to give myself a chance. And I've always, throughout my life, been presented with opportunities, and I've been coached by a lot of people and the angels that sit on my shoulder to take advantage of any opportunity that's presented, you know, to me. So I grabbed that opportunity. I was determined to make it. It was not an easy, it wasn't easy. But, you know, I got halfway through and I had miraculous results according to my doctor, which gave me encouragement to keep going. You know, I had hope then.
So what were some of the things that you did to try to get into that 40% group?
Well, you know, I was unfortunately notified of my diagnosis through my chart. And, you know, I was crying hysterically that night. And the next day I just got up and went to the gym because that's what I did on Fridays. So, you know, I continued my life just doing the things that I had been doing. You know, I'm in the gym probably 3 days or 4 days, you know, a week, and you know, just kept that up, kept having lunch with friends, kept being busy. You know, I do some consulting, and you know, I just kept busy, kept my life going as it was going without the travel. Since I couldn't get away. I mean, you know.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Thank you. I wish I was as dedicated at the gym as you are. Camille, speaking of stats, you said something that I found really interesting in that sometimes when you're living at the cutting edge of what research knows, that the best answer or the best kind of treatment plan for you is the one that's really tailored to your own needs. And I just was really struck by that. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Certainly. I think part of this has to do with the bias to action that we all feel when we first get diagnosed in this context. We know how quickly melanoma can spread like so many other cancers. And it's like, all right, I'm just going to take the first piece of advice that someone gives me and run with it. And the first piece of advice that I got was to get Mohs surgery because we didn't know how deep my cancer actually was. It was in my ear, which typically lends itself to stage 0, stage 1. Obviously, that was not the case for me. And I think one critical step for my family was saying, okay, let's slow down for a second. Let's get in touch with everybody that we know who has even ever spoken the word melanoma, who knows anything about the space, because we really didn't know anything, and start to just get doctors' opinions about this. And actually, we had this fortuitous connection to MRA, and the team at MRA, and specifically Dr. Hurlbert, got on the phone and connected me with my care team at Memorial Sloan Kettering, where I've been treated ever since. And once I got connected with that team, they said, hold on now, let's do a second biopsy. How deep is this really? Well, it was a fair bit deeper than we'd expected. And then we started to kind of dive into, options that information had led us to. And so I think it's about pumping the brakes a little bit, even though we all have a bias towards action, and then asking those questions. And we've talked about advocacy a lot today, but being able to stand up for yourself and say, what does this really mean? What are my odds based on the latest and greatest? Is it important for me to go through cryopreservation? What do we know about adjuvant therapy and how it impacts fertility? Because it's important for me one day to have those kinds of options. And so really digging in about the stuff that is important to you and not just taking the first piece of advice that's given by someone who's a doctor who may not also have all the information just yet because of how fast this space is moving.
And I'd like to ask Elizabeth, Trena mentioned Dr. Google, but when you were first diagnosed, Dr. Google wasn't a thing.
Hadn't been born yet. Yeah.
So the proverbial book was not written. So how did you get information? How did you get up to speed?
Well, there was something called a telephone that we actually used for talking. And there were fax machines, that make those annoying sounds. Yeah, but they were crucial. And see, by this time, so let's bump up from, when I was 24 to when I was whatever I was in my later 20s in 1988, and they found the tumors in my lungs, right? What are we going to do, right? By this time, I had moved from New England. I had been living in Vermont. I moved to Wisconsin because, I don't know, I had this image of the Dairyland, not what it is today, but what it was back then. I lived there. I was working at a newspaper. By this time, my mother turned out to be my best ally, the one I was terrified of hurting, right? She was like, Elizabeth, and she was in Massachusetts, and we tag teamed. We were on the phone. And when somebody in their 20s, you don't realize this when you're in your 20s because you think you're old and an adult, right? You're calling these places, and they're like, you're what? You're how old? And you have what? We can help you. I mean, we called all the cancer centers, and they sent us. The U.S. Postal Service was delivering items about, yes, faxes were coming in. I mean, phone calls were being returned. It was miraculous. So I had this pile. Well, and so that helped me through many iterations. But then when this lung thing happened, I went to the hospital in Madison, and this somewhat, I don't know, nutty oncologist, that's a kind term. He said, Elizabeth, I have 4 options for you. And I said, okay, so he gave me the literature on it. I read all of it. I came back to him, I said, I don't like any of them. They're awful. What am I gonna do? Well, as usual, I'm gonna get on the phone. So I called the place where my father had been treated in New England, affiliated with Dartmouth in Hanover. I said, can you help me? Do I need to drive over there for you to treat this lung thing? She said, let me check. The doctor who is a star at Dartmouth, who has invented a regimen for melanoma that can be used for lung treatment, it was a chemotherapy, is in Wisconsin. I'm like, what? He lived 45 minutes from me. So he was at a different hospital, so I went there, right? I went on that chemotherapy regime. Did it disappear? No, but it didn't grow. And the doctors tell you, that's great news. Of course, when you have it, you're like, I want to get rid of it. Can't you do something? No, because it was in both lungs. But it was a holding pattern. I was happy. Just jumping ahead briefly, when it appeared in my liver and I had to have the lobe taken out, that doctor also arranged for me to get surgery. So somebody was talking earlier about serendipitous timing. I mean, even if you're pushing the button a little bit and you open the door and you're like, oh, what? And this walks through. So I just took it, right? Sorry I babbled, but.
No. Yeah, thank you. And I also know, Elizabeth, that melanoma has continued to impact your family. Could you talk a little bit about your mother's diagnosis?
Yeah. I mean, holy cow, I don't know who writes this stuff because I don't write it. And I've written a lot of copy. But my mother, 89, diagnosed with mucosal melanoma in the rectum. What kind of an indignity is that, right? But I what did I do? I'm like, oh, remember all those years ago when I was on the phone? So I jumped in, and my sisters were doing all the other stuff, but they, the medical stuff, they freeze up. So I jumped in. I was the advocate, and it was, I didn't know what I knew until I had to use it so intimately. And so I said, we're going to get a plan. Once we have a plan, you're going to feel better. I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know what it's going to do. But once we have one, and sure enough, it was like, so I took her to, and this is when MRA did exist, hallelujah. So I roped them in too. So, and I'll fast forward. My mother has been through 2 types of immunotherapy, radiation. She lives in Virginia now, so she's a little closer. And the tumor is teeny weeny. So she's just being observed, and she turned 90. Yeah. So.
That's great. Please share our happy birthday to your mom.
Okay.
So, and I'm keeping an eye on time, and I would love to get some audience questions if we can, but there is one more topic that I'd love for us to just dive into a little bit, and that's the idea of survivorship and adapting to the new normal. Camille, I'd like to also start, I think, again with you. Throughout your journey with melanoma, you kept up with activities, school, running, work, and the like. How did you decide what you wanted to prioritize?
I am a very goal-oriented person, and maybe that won't shock most of you. But I had lots of thoughts about what it was that I wanted to do. I had timelines, I had things I was interested in. I've always been a big runner. I was laughing during the session earlier about marathon runners because I was a marathon runner when I was diagnosed, and I continue running marathons today now for MRA and MSK, which is awesome. But I decided that I wasn't willing to compromise on those things that brought me joy outside of, outside of work, outside of, everything else in my personal life had to keep going. I decided pretty early on, and that was, of course, much easier said than done. But to their great credit, my team at Memorial Sloan Kettering was very supportive of that. I think 5 months into my adjuvant therapy, I went to my doctor, Jed Walchuk, and I said, I'm going to run the Miami Marathon. And he said, you're going to do what? And I said, yeah, I'm going to run the Miami Marathon in February. And it was terrible. It was really hard. It was horrible. But it brought me a lot of joy and personal satisfaction to complete it and feel like I was going to continue living and doing all the things that I'd hoped my mid-20s would bring, while also battling and fighting and beating this disease. And similarly, I had goals about graduate school. I'm now in grad school. I live in Boston. I did all of my applications while I was finishing up my treatment. And I just said, all right, I'm going to try and compartmentalize that element of my life and continue, activating on all these other parts, because I don't want to, I don't want to press pause. I feel like I've used that terminology a lot today, but I don't want to press pause and then wake up once I'm done with the adjuvant therapy and say, okay, now my life can resume. Like, life keeps going while all of this is happening. And so that was my approach. I had my priority list before the diagnosis, and I tried to just maintain that. And of course, there are certain days where you wake up in the morning and you can't go run the half marathon that you had on your training plan for that day. And so being compassionate with oneself and just saying, all right, that's obviously not happening today. Maybe it will happen tomorrow. And retaining that optimism made me feel like my entire life wasn't dominated by this prognosis and the treatment plan, but that I could, continue moving on those other things too.
Yeah. And thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Camille, do you think you look at life differently now?
One thing that I'm trying very hard to retain now that I'm done with treatment, and I'm trying to cling to, that I think was a real silver lining from all of this, was that when you're dealing with an issue like a serious diagnosis of this kind or any kind of debilitating illness, there's only a certain bandwidth that you have to care about other things. And only the really important things make it in. And all the little things that we stress about on a day-to-day that are really unimportant, little social dynamics. Why'd I say that thing to that person? I must have seemed so silly here. This random stuff just fades away because you don't have the bandwidth. And now that I'm hopefully done with treatment, I start to feel those things creep back in, those little concerns, those meaningless worries. And so I'm trying to retain that outlook on life, which is like, there's a lot of stuff that's really important, and there's a lot of stuff that's just really not. So the extent to which I can suppress those not unimportant things, I think that will benefit me coming out of this.
Yeah, thank you for that. Trena, when we were talking about, adapting to this new normal, you had mentioned that your treatments caused some physical changes, and that those were sometimes really difficult to adjust. And could you speak a little bit about that?
Yes. All my life, I had been extremely skinny to the point where people would come up to me and say, "Are you eating?" They were worried about me. I was so thin, and always had a ponytail. Well, so now, in the middle of therapy, I lose my hair, so I have no hair, and because I lost my thyroid and my adrenal gland, and before that was corrected, the hair came out, but. To rectify that, I'm on steroids, for the rest of my life. And so, I ballooned up, and I also got vitiligo. So my friends started treating me differently, and I should put friends in quotes, and I describe it as became invisible to them. I wasn't in the room. They didn't know what to say. They didn't know how to react to me, with this new physical appearance. And I'm the same person inside, and I'm wondering, what's going on. But, you finally have to realize that all of your friends aren't really your good friends. So, you have to let some people go, because there's just no place for negativity, in my space anyway. But it definitely did affect me. I was looking at the world through a different lens, different physical lens.
Yeah, and I want to come back to something you said earlier, in that, you didn't. That sometimes there's a sense that Black people don't get melanoma, and that added almost another layer that you had to explain away and help people understand. Could you talk a little bit about that, and how you've helped, or how you work to raise awareness within the community?
I was like a unicorn, having something that nobody had seen, or a lot of people hadn't even heard of. I mean, everybody knew stay away from tanning beds. Well, I wasn't doing that, but they did not know, nor did I for probably a year, that I had a different, rare melanoma. I mean, there's just not enough education, about rare melanomas. So since then, I think I've spent, you don't want to run into me at a cocktail party, because I'm gonna talk about it. But I try to, I'm very free telling my story, because people don't know, they don't know what they don't know. So, I'm always talking about it. I've been asked to talk to, several groups of women, mainly women, one church group. I always agree to interviews, and Ken did a wonderful interview of me that was published. So, I'm happy to spread the word, and I feel like that's how I give back. I need to educate and support people as much as I can. And since then, several people, well, I guess only 3, but 3 lives have come to me and said, "We discovered melanoma because of you, because of what you said. We had no idea."
Wow.
So,
that's incredible.
I'm very pleased to, have been a part of their lives, or their ongoing lives. So, I will continue to just be very, very vocal about what I've been through, and what the possibilities are for people in the future.
Well, I want to thank you for that, because that is the power of stories right there, and being willing to share those stories. So thank you for that, Trena. I also would be remiss if I did not use this as an opportunity to shamelessly plug the RARE registry. That's raremelanoma.org. You can learn more and sign up online. Switching gears a little bit. Elizabeth, you have described your approach to melanoma as, and I'm quoting you now, plowing through and showing up. And that you said melanoma was life-changing, and in that it made you live with more intention. Could you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, I guess the bumper sticker version of that is that people matter. So take the time to engage with people and let them know that they do matter to you. Spend time with them. Don't say, oh, I'll get to that tomorrow, because you might not get to that tomorrow. It gives you a sense of urgency. And I guess, career-wise, I get that goal-driven thing, and it can make you nuts, right? But I guess what I sort of did was flip my life. I continued to work as a reporter, but I would find these ways to take sabbaticals or take time in between jobs. So after I had recovered from this, this chemotherapy with the lungs, I put a backpack on my back and hiked from Georgia to Maine on the Appalachian Trail, and I finished the whole thing, camping every night. I also met my spouse, but that's another story. I did things like that because I thought, my God, my father died when he was 44, tick-tock. You look at the clock, you think in your 20s you have all this time. Well, you don't. So, and then I rode my bike across the country to raise money for the hospital in Wisconsin that saved my life. So I went from Oregon to Virginia, camping every night, carrying, half my panniers were full of brochures that I'm handing out. I was the outreach, because I engage with everybody. It's like, oh, listen to this. So I like to think I made an impression. And then, I don't know, it took me a long time, because I write about other people, and writing about myself is incredibly difficult. But I did write a book about that, because I realized I kept thinking about my father on this trip and thinking, I didn't really know him. What do you know when you're 15? Well, you think you know a lot, but you know very little. So I wrote a book about that bike ride and my cancer and my father. So that is a little unconventional, and it's hard to bare your soul. Sometimes you're like, can I take that back? No, it's out there. So read it. But anyway. So I might not be able to retire because I've taken these sabbaticals. So, and if I live long enough, I'll be like 90 years old, still taking notes, but whatever.
And Elizabeth, do you have any advice for someone who maybe they're struggling with how to take that next step, how to really process their diagnosis?
Yeah, I think we look at a lot of numbers. A lot of doctors and people bring a lot of numbers. Don't let yourself be a statistic, right? I read when doctors would give me this stuff and I'm reading, I'm like, well, that doesn't look well, I don't think I want to take that interleukin-2. That looks kind of scary, and I want to. So, but then when that chemo that the doctor from New England gave me, I read it, and then I talked to him about it, right? And so that's my thing. It's like, you are you. You're not, the 65-year-old in the study. You're not you are not. You are an individual. So you've got to go into this with hope. There's no reason not to do that. But the number stuff, I know it matters. I know it's important. I know it gets funding and all of that. But to you, set it aside and trust your instincts.
Thank you. And very well said, right? This next question is for James, and I'm going to go a little off script, so please bear with me. I'm realizing that the prepared question is a little too similar to maybe some of the other answers that you've already given. But as someone who I think this is your first kind of program like this that you've attended, I'm curious what you got out of it, or maybe what you're going to tell your friends back in Buffalo about this program or about the people who come to this program?
Yeah, I think really it's just been an opportunity to meet and talk to other people that, that are melanoma survivors, patients, advocates involved, that I just haven't had the opportunity to do that before. I mean, honestly, it's not something that, I mean, maybe there are, and I haven't sought them out, but I don't know that there's any melanoma support groups in Buffalo. I mean, I obviously talked to other cancer survivors and things like that, but really just, I think it's comforting because you do feel like, hey, there's just a common, even if your stories are different, there's some common feelings and themes that people experience. And also just, to your point, Elizabeth, you hear the survivor stories and it gives you hope, right? I mean, because honestly, it's still something that kind of hangs over your head, but when you the more people that you hear that have lived for many years, after having a diagnosis, it just gives you additional hope. And really, for me, the whole, from day one, I kind of decided that my daughter, deserves to have a father and my wife deserves to have a husband, and I wasn't gonna just kind of curl up when I some days, some from the side effects, I felt like I could barely walk and, barely get myself out of bed, but, decided that, they deserve, to have that for however long it was going to be, hopefully a long time, but maybe not. And, you mentioned the Disney thing. I mean, we like going to Disney, and sometimes the prospect of, walking around and standing in line for an hour to, get on a, little boat and hear puppets singing, really didn't sound great, even though it's something that we love. But I was like, I'm going to do this if I have to get on one of those little scooters and ride around the Magic Kingdom, and we did, and had some of the greatest times, times that we've ever had. So, really, I think just the spirit that I've captured here has been awesome, but really I think those same feelings kind of persist, and it makes you kind of feel like you're not alone.
Yeah, thank you for that. Now, we do have a couple of minutes for some audience questions, maybe 2 or 3. There's a question right here, if Renee is running to you. Thank you, Renee.
Hello. So one of you said sometimes it's easier to tell a stranger than to tell your family, and I was wondering if any of you would be open to sharing one sentence about what you would vulnerably say to your family right now, if you could, about having melanoma.
What was the last part of that? What would we say to our family if what?
So I think the question was if you, actually, do you want to?
Yeah.
You said it better than I.
I wanted to make sure it was clear.
For some context, I'm a family member of someone with melanoma, and I'm asking what you guys would say to your family about melanoma and your experience. You were talking about how it's not so easy to tell your family what's going on with you, melanoma, or what you had been through. If you could say something today, what would you say to your family about it?
Yeah.
I think what I would say is just that, I don't know if this is totally on the top, exactly what you're looking for, but I think one of the things that I've found is that, especially with my wife, it's been difficult for her as the caregiver. What I would tell her is that, you're supporting me, and that means everything, but make sure that you're finding support, for yourself as well. And also, the other thing that I would say, not maybe to her, but to try to do as a person who has such great support from the family, is try to help them find that support. So, talk to some of the other people in their life that that they lean on, and kind of help them to get that support, because really the people that are the caregivers, in some ways it's even harder for them than the patients in certain aspects of it, and they really need the support too. So I think that's just one of the things that I would say is just make sure that you're helping them support themselves, making sure that as a caregiver that you're going out and finding that support and not kind of just feeling like you need to always kind of power through and just be that rock for your patient, or whatever you want to call them. Make sure you're getting that support, because ultimately, like, you got to put your own mask on before you can put the person put the person next to you's mask on, and that's the best way to support them.
Yeah. Anyone else want to take a stab?
No, I'm divorced, no kids. I was married to one.
Trina, you crack me up. I'm speechless, and I'm rarely speechless. How about another question?
Hi, thanks for being here and telling your stories. I was wondering, Camille, you had said that you were trying to hang on to the feeling that you had when you were going through your diagnosis and kind of letting all the petty shit in life kind of go. And I found that mindfulness meditation has helped immensely, just to kind of keep my feet on the ground and like let everything go. And I was wondering if there was anything else that you guys might be doing, especially Elizabeth, that you were saying traveling and just experiencing life. How do you hang on to the silver linings that a diagnosis can give you just when you're experiencing life?
Well, I'll say that I can't do meditation because when they tell you, when they have the imagery of, imagine, this Pac-Man or this white cloud coming in and cleaning out the tumor, my brain immediately goes to this black thing crawling through, and I'm like, So I don't do that. But it's talking with people, having conversations with people keeps me grounded. And the other thing is, my meditation is exercising. It's walking, it's doing this crazy ritual in the morning with push-ups and sit-ups and the hanging and whatever, and swimming. So you find, and that is the calming part that gets you back, and that can wash away all that pettiness that you start, it starts to seep back in. You think, don't let that happen. It's going to happen, right? We're humans, we're crowded together. Well, for a while we weren't, but we are now with just annoying people, right? So washing that away, and I just find exercise is the way for my balance.
Yeah. Anyone else want to talk about how they kind of unwind or?
I'm also big into exercise. I love running, I love playing sports, but I would say the other thing that's helpful for me is actually sharing the story and sharing the learnings, because many of my friends will ask me that question, what is it that you're taking away from this experience? And articulating it reminds you of all the things that you, I don't want to say appreciate about it per se, but that kind of thing, the learnings that you've taken away that you think would have taken you a fair bit longer to achieve in another setting. So, now I just started at school this year, and I'm making all these new friends, and 90% of them know that I'm a cancer survivor, because I'm like, listen, you were working in DC the last couple of years? Let me tell you what I was doing the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And then they're curious and to articulate it, and ultimately you just have this talk track, and it's like, these are the 3 things that I'm appreciative of coming out of this experience that to you sounds horrible, but there are big things that I'm walking away with. So articulating it, I guess.
Yeah.
I found, that organizing the golf tournament fundraiser for me has been kind of therapeutic in terms of just feeling like you're taking some sort of power back to do something, even if it's relatively small in the grand scheme of things. Like, it still feels like you're actually doing something, and also just, the amount of support that I've gotten from, people in my life by doing that is really, been gratifying and really, helped me to kind of look at the bigger picture, versus some of the day-to-day, minor struggles, so.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say it takes courage to be vulnerable. And if you make yourself vulnerable by telling your story, good for you, right? And good for the world.
Yeah. Trena, anything to add?
Well, I had a wonderful life that was interrupted for a brief period of time by a diagnosis, but as I look back on it, I always think, what has melanoma done for me, not to me? And I say for me because it has made me look at life with a much deeper appreciation for every single day that I'm alive. So for that, I am thankful, and that's what I focus on. And I say, live your life.
All right, I wish I was the Jeopardy host and I had that little noise that indicates we're in Final Jeopardy. But we're now going to move into a lightning round. I'd like to ask each of our panelists to just offer one more thing, and that is, what do you want every single person in this room, everyone joining us virtually, to walk away with? And we can go in any order, whoever.
I think mine's just a one-word answer of hope.
Thank you.
I think mine, and especially towards a younger audience, is just your health is the most important thing. Prioritize your health. Like, I was so close to not going to the dermatologist that day because I thought that I had really important stuff to do at work and I didn't have the time. I needed to get there. And, had I waited a couple more months, who knows what could have happened. So just do the annual checkups, but just do it.
Oh, I guess I'll go. So it's the seek out and trust the helpers, because somebody mentioned it earlier. These teams, these doctor teams, they want to help you live. They really want to. I'm not saying, if you have a bad team, get away from them, but you can find them, ask a lot of questions, and then jump in and work with them, because it matters. It matters to them, it'll matter to you.
I'm just gonna reiterate something that I answered another question, is make sure you're supporting the people that support you and make sure they're finding support, because that is extremely important, both for you, for them, and also for your community.
So we're going to conclude our panel today. I hope that you all have taken away even half as much as I personally have taken away from interacting and working with these folks on the stage. Let's give them another round of applause. It's not easy getting all mic'd up and being asked to talk about what can be a really heavy portion of your life, but you guys have made it look effortless. You've also kind of distilled those core learnings for us, and I'm just so grateful. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Cody. Thank you.